Welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is April Adams Pertuis, a storytelling specialist and host of the Inside Story podcast. She uses her skills from over 25 years in journalism, video marketing, and digital storytelling to teach other people how to craft and deliver their message and find their story. Welcome, April.
Thank you, Bridget. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I am so excited to talk to you because we both have a background in journalism, and I'm really passionate about teaching people how to communicate effectively. I think that we can only get so far in our passions without knowing how to talk about ourselves and what we do really well.
Yeah, it's a huge thing that a lot of people struggle with. And, if you think about it, I mean, you and I have some background in this because we actually studied journalism. So we learned a few skills there. But unless you've had any kind of training in that arena, then we just weren't taught this kind of stuff in school. We weren't really, taught how to do it and sort of just kind of sent out into the marketplace to figure it out. And that's why a lot of people struggle.
Right. What do you find to be the biggest struggles when you're working with people and coaching them around storytelling?
Um, I think there's two big ones. One is just having zero awareness that storytelling even is something they should be doing, right?
Mhm.
So they've never really given storytelling much thought and they think, oh, it's for fairy tales or, that's something the caveman did, but they don't really understand that storytelling is woven into just about everything that we do.
Mhm.
It's woven into how we shop for groceries. It's woven into how we make buying decisions. It's woven into even how we connect with other people. It's woven into so much. But if you're not actually paying attention to that or aware of it, then it's just easy to kind of poo-poo storytelling and think that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, if you are aware that storytelling is something that is very valuable and important and part of our communication, the uh, thing that often trips a lot of people up is then thinking that their story is not worth sharing, or that they have such a story that they have no idea how to tell it, right? Either way, whether you think you have a story or you don't, either way, if you don't know how to tell it, it's going to keep you from telling it, right? So it will keep you from actually getting yourself in the game of storytelling. And so that can be a big problem. And it often keeps people from just not doing it and not giving it a try, not learning. And I always remind everybody it's a skill.
Mhm.
Storytelling is a skill. It's not something that really anyone was innately born with. We learn it from others. And
Right.
so, you do have to be intentional about it. You do have to practice it
Mhm.
a lot. I practice it every single day because I'm always trying to become a better storyteller.
Mhm.
And so if you don't put any energy behind it, then you really won't ever learn how to effectively communicate because you'll be missing out on that key piece.
Yeah. Yeah, when you have someone you're working with and they feel as though they don't have a story that really can sell them or that tells about what they do, how do you even get started with that?
Well, first of all, I have a fundamental belief that I pretty much have corroborated from, 30 plus years of experience of interviewing people for a living, that everybody does have a story. So whether you believe that or not, take it from me, an expert in the field, that everybody does have a story. I can assure you, I've never ever walked away from an interview going, well, that was a waste of time. Like that person really doesn't have a story. I don't got anything to work with here. I don't know how I'm
Yeah.
going to make anything out of that. I mean, it just does not happen. So really, honestly, um, what we were taught in journalism school was to ask a lot of questions and then to listen. Great storytellers learn to listen. And
Mhm.
so you just have to get curious. You have to get curious and wonder a little bit. And so when you begin to wonder and you allow your brain to formulate some questions in your mind and you allow yourself to lead with curiosity, then you
Mhm.
are naturally going to ask some questions that's going to help uncover the story that is inside that person. And
Yeah.
so when I sit down and talk with people, so, like someone that just says, oh, I don't have a story, I can say, "Oh, really? Well, let's
Mhm.
test that out." And I'll just start asking them questions. And sometimes they start very benign, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, well, tell me, where are you from? Right? Like, I
Right.
don't really need to know where they're from to get to the story, but I've got to warm that person up a little bit.
Yeah.
So it might be something really simple like, well, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about your family. What sort of things are you interested in? Are you married, or, those types of things.
Mhm.
But it's the questions that you're going to ask after you get that first set of answers that's
Yeah.
going to start leading you down the storytelling path. And so once you find kind of those first line answers, then you have to listen again to their answers, get
Mhm.
curious, and then ask a follow-up question. And so where people go off the rails and don't communicate effectively is, number one, they don't listen. And so they might answer, like, if I were to ask you, where are you from? And you can say, Ohio, then if I'm quick to jump in and tell you about the time that I visited Ohio,
Mm.
I've now taken the interview question away from you and I've hijacked the conversation, right? Instead, I need to ask more questions to keep going deeper and deeper to find out more about you being from Ohio. Where did you grow up? What sort of things were you interested in? What sort of pivotal moments have you had in your life? What sort of things have mattered to you? What sort of things have influenced you? I can't get to those third and fourth layer deep questions if I'm going to jump in and insert myself into your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like the story that you as an interviewer will draw out of your interviewee or the person whose story you're looking to tell,
Mhm.
that story is really dependent upon the quality of the questions that you ask them too.
And it's really dependent on creating psychological safety for that person to share with you.
Mm.
That's another big one.
Yeah.
So we actually have to show genuine interest when we're asking the questions. If the person on the other side of the questions feels like you're just fishing,
Mhm.
or you're just trying to get to something so that I can sell you something or something like that, right? So if we're being transactional, it's not going to work. You
Yeah.
really have to show genuine interest. And so this is where you're going to have to do a little work on yourself to make sure
Mm.
that your intentions are pure and that you're coming at it from the right place. Because if not, then that person may not feel safe with you to or not really going to give you the time of day to answer those questions. And then it becomes really hard for you to dig out the story. And then what happens as a result of that is that no connection is made.
Mm.
Nothing fruitful comes from that. So this is why storytelling is so important in so many areas of our life. Like if we're a leader in our business, or we're an entrepreneur, or we're out, building community with people, we need to be paying attention to other people's stories, and we need to create
Mm.
a space where those people feel like we are genuinely interested in their answers, because then they're going to feel safe enough to share with us. And if we don't create that, then no connection is made.
Yeah. Hi, I'm curious, speaking of passionate pursuits, how did you find your way into this path that you're on now?
I'm actually working on a talk that I'm delivering this weekend, and I'm speaking
Mm.
on this very topic. And so
Oh,
the
cool.
story that I'm going to share with you is very fresh in my mind, because it's a story that I'm going to share with the audience, which is literally where I believe it all started for me was um, when I was young, when I was a kid growing up. One of my favorite places to be was at my grandmother's house. I loved spending the night with her. I loved hanging out with her. She was this beautiful matriarch of our family, and I just adored her. I thought she had class and style and elegance, and I just wanted to be her. And so I spent a lot of time with her, and spending the night with her was one of my favorite things. And my grandmother we would get in bed at night. I slept with her, and we would crawl in bed and turn off the lights. And she had this old AM radio that she would
Mm.
pull into the bed with us, and she would turn it on. And, back in the day, you had to
Yeah,
dial
yeah.
dial in and get the static to go away and get the channel just right so that you could get the station. And it was just a talk radio station that was literally one of those where people would dial in, people, like random
Mm.
people all out there in all walks of life from all different places would dial in, and the radio host would say, "Caller, you're on the air." And after that, then the caller, whoever it was, could just share whatever they wanted to share. This wasn't a radio station that was a topic about grief or a topic about comedy. It was like whatever, everything was game. And my grandmother and I, we would lay in bed at night and we would listen to that AM radio, and we would listen to these strangers call in to this radio station and share their stories. Now, some of the stories were funny and would make us laugh. We'd have us just like bowling over in the bed, laughing and worried we were going to wake up my grandfather in the other room. And then some of them would be the most tenderhearted, heart-wrenching stories that sometimes would make us cry. And my grandmother and I would lay there at night and hold each other's hands and just listen to these people's stories. And so something about that impacted me. I know it did, because number one, I can still remember that story all these years later. And I remember that being something that influenced me early on, because I was so taken by the people that dialed in. I didn't know, maybe I would know their first name because they might say, "Hey, I'm Susie and I'm from Texas," right? But that would be the most information we would get out of them. And then the rest of what came was the story that they wanted to share. And I felt connected to Susie from Texas. I felt like I knew Susie from Texas. I wanted to be friends with Susie from Texas because Susie was sharing her story, right? And so it made me realize that in some way, back then as a kid, somehow it made me realize that storytelling was really important. And I was so fascinated with that process. And I loved that experience of every time I got to spend the night with my grandmother, we did this. This was an activity we did every time I spent the night with her. So it had a huge impact on me as a kid, that it is probably no surprise that I found a way to go and make a living as a storyteller by learning to become a journalist. And so, the connection is pretty like from point A to point B, not hard to figure out. But that is definitely something that early in my childhood sticks out to me as being a profound memory of impact that made me think, well, I want to go do that. I want to go facilitate more of those stories, because I know that they can make other people feel less alone. I feel like we're all, and this is such an important message, I feel like right now in today's world, which is very complicated and very divisive. And there's a lot going on, even in the moment, in the Middle East, where everyone's being pitted against each other. When we just start telling our stories, we realize we are so much more alike than we are different. Just like those people telling the stories on the AM radio station, I didn't know their religious beliefs. I didn't know their political affiliation. I didn't know if they were rich or poor. I didn't know if they were Democrat or Republican or any of this, white or black. I didn't know the color of their skin. I just didn't know a lot. But when they shared their humanness, their comedy of telling a funny story about some escapade and, in their backyard, or, telling their journey of overcoming cancer or dealing with a loss in their family or navigating a divorce, their humanness is what made me feel connected to them and made me realize, even at 7, 8, 9 years old, when I didn't have any life experience to speak of yet, it still made me feel connected to them and made me feel like that I could just be like them. They're just like me. This could be me. So it made me realize that storytelling allows us to connect because we're so much more alike than we are different.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And it really strikes me how this was such an early experience for you, and yet you just sort of followed this strand your whole life. Like, how powerful that is.
And I didn't know I was doing that at the time, clearly.
Yeah.
You don't have awareness around that. But, I have been a passionate storyteller for over 30 years now. And I get asked this question all the time, like, where does this come from? And so, I've had to go on my own excavation to figure it out. Like, well, I don't know. Where did this come from? And these are the stories that bubble up for me when I ask myself my own questions and put myself through that process of trying to figure it out. These are the memories that come up for me. And then it's like, oh, well, that probably had a pretty big impact on me. And for sure, I know that it did.
Yeah, I think that's a great question that people can use to sort of do the same process for themselves. If you're listening and you're thinking, I'm really passionate about this thing, but I don't know how to tell people about it. Well, when was a time that you were a child that you just got so wrapped up in an experience of a moment, and what was going on and what was going through your head and what were you feeling in that moment? And I think that a lot of us could bring up a memory like that.
Yeah.
That was impactful.
And
Yeah.
that's really how our stories, can serve when we are thinking of a particular topic, something that, like you said, that we could be passionate about, or maybe it's part of our work in the world, or it's a cause that is near and dear to our heart that we want to raise money for, whatever it is, right? We can usually, with a few simple questions, find the origin of that. Like, find, where did that begin for you? When did that start to make an influence or have an impact on you and influence you? And those are really important origin stories to meditate on, to excavate, to figure out. Because I promise you, once you start to do this for yourself, you will start to make a whole lot more sense to yourself. You're like, oh, this is why I am the way I am, or this is why I do this a certain way. It's like, I've always thought that I was kind of weird. Now I'm not weird. Now I understand where it comes from. I've always said that about me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm the weird girl that like ask everybody all these questions.
I
But
say the
now
same thing.
right? But I'm not weird. This is just where it came from for me. And it made me make sense of my life the minute I started to dig into my own story. And listen, I didn't dig into my own story for a long time. I was the excavator of other people's stories, the journalist who would go and tell your story or find out their story, but I wasn't actively pursuing my own story. And that's really only been in the last 10 years that I have been doing this work for myself, and really focusing on my story also, which has been a huge gift, and it can be very healing in a lot of ways, because you really do make sense of the world when you start to understand yourself a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking the same thing, and you totally took the words out of my mouth. But doing that exercise doesn't just make you a good storyteller. It helps you to process things,
Hmm.
your experience. That's a really valuable way of understanding yourself. And I think that it's crucial to understand ourselves better if we're going to communicate about what
Yeah.
it is that we do and connect with other people. If we don't understand why we do what we do, or why we feel the way we feel, then how are we supposed to make those connections with
It
others?
will make it hard, which is what I said at the beginning. Why people don't do it is, number one, they don't have any awareness at
Yes.
all. So
Hmm.
number one, raise your awareness, get curious, start asking yourself some of these questions, right? And then, the second part is be willing to share. And that's another hard one for a lot of people, is being willing to share. And listen, this is, I guess, why it's good that people do struggle with this, because it gave me a business to have, and it's how I make a living today. But
Yep.
I really don't want people to struggle in this arena, because the more we share, the more we are connected, the more we realize we are more alike than we are different. But what we're scared of in sharing, so much so, is that we're going to be seen as different or the weirdo. And what really happens is you just attract so many people to you when you share, because other people do see themselves in your story, and that creates a lot of likeness, like they want to be around you. They want to know you. It builds that community. It creates that connection.
Yeah. There's something that I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, David Oakes. He's
Mm-mm.
he coaches mainly nonprofits and nonprofit leaders around
Okay.
sharing their stories in order to
Yeah.
get donations and to raise money.
Sure. Yeah.
But one big thing he said that really stuck with me was that instead of sharing your mission or your vision, one of the great ways to wrap people into your story is to share what it looks like when you've had the impact that you're looking to have on the world. So
Mm.
start with the finish. And when you're telling that finished story, involve your potential donors in that story.
Mhm.
So find a way to tell of the impact that they've had through the work they've done, hand in hand with your organization. And I thought, oh my gosh, it seems so obvious as someone who would be listening to this story. Of course, I'd want to hear it told that way. But when you're in the seat of the person who's telling the story and trying to share that vision, it's almost like we're clouded from being on the other side, and we can't think in terms of what our listeners need to receive and need to hear.
Yeah, I describe that by focusing on what you want to say first, like what is the message you want to share. So in his terms, it's like, focus on the outcome, like the benefits received, right? So yeah, like it's like I said, I didn't tell my story for a long time, didn't see like, as a journalist, you're trained to like not focus on your own story. And so for so long, I was focused on other people's stories and could teach them how to do it all day long, but I wasn't focused on my story. And it's like once I started figuring out my story and then telling my story and then having the experience of other people coming to me and saying, April, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I really needed to hear that today because, number one, if you're going to tell stories, you got to tell a real story. It's not this marketing version of your story, not the glossy front page cover of your story, not the bio that's going to go on the website page of your story. It's like your real story, the story that has real emotion, real, feeling, and some vulnerability tossed in. And the more that you're able to do that, that's when people are going to connect with you. And so you got to think through that in your experience and like, what's the message you want to share what is something you want people to hear from you? And once you've identified that, just like you said, you can kind of go backwards and say, okay, well, when did you not have that? What did it look like for you when you were struggling? What did it look like for you to figure it out? How did you come to this conclusion? And then you bring the audience along with you on that journey as you share that transformation for yourself.
Yeah, I try to model this as a podcaster and when I'm sharing things as well. And I've seen and felt the impact of that in my audience, but I'm curious, sorry about this. Someone wants to talk to. I'm curious, what was the most impactful speech or speaker you've ever witnessed?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. There's so many great speakers out there. There's so many great speakers. Um, I think well, one from again when I was kind of coming through the ranks as a journalist, and I know this is going to be sound like a cop out answer, but I remember growing up, two people that really influenced me around storytelling from different angles. One, Barbara Walters. So Barbara Walters was the queen of being able to ask really great questions and pulling the most amazing stories out of people, like really famous for getting people to cry on camera and all that kind of stuff. And so she was really fun to witness her brilliance of how she was able to ask really piercing questions. And she created psychological safety for people to share. I mean, it was unbelievable what she was able to do. And on the flip side of that, another person who came up through the ranks of journalism, but made just a huge impact on the world, not only because she asked great questions, but she was the first person that really showed me how she also shared her own very vulnerable story, which was Oprah Winfrey. I grew up watching the Oprah Winfrey show and, Oprah sharing her own battles with weight or, struggling as an African-American trying to make it in television, just various struggles. She, very open about being abused as a young girl. And so, the more that she gained influence and power, the more she was able to share those stories to make other people feel less alone. And I am not Black, I did come up through television, but I didn't have some of the same struggles that Oprah did specifically. But it was that vulnerability piece, her willingness to just be so open about her struggles that made me realize it is safe for us to do this because we really can make an impact when you don't have to be Oprah Winfrey, right? Like Oprah's one of those that it's like it's an easy one for everyone to say, but all of us have the ability to actually be influential over someone else. I mean, you know, I know that there are women in my community that might answer the question you just asked by saying April, like because I've been out there sharing my story that I've been influential or impactful to them. And, I know people would say that about you listening to your podcast. Like though people would say, oh, it's Bridget, Bridget's the one that has, influenced me, and so we all have that capability, but definitely witnessing those two giants do it, for sure, I feel like paved a way for so many other people.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think that's a cop out at all. I think it's so important to remember that people see others in places of power where they can use their voices, and they think, oh, it's just a privilege, but when you have someone like an Oprah who
Mhm.
shares vulnerably about
Mhm.
her upbringing and her stories, that's not a place of privilege.
Not at all.
She fought for her voice to be heard and to earn her place there.
Absolutely.
So I think it's important to remember that also as podcasters, we seek to give a platform to a lot of women. I know that I specifically am really passionate about giving women and people in other minority positions a place where they can share their story and where their voice can be heard.
Yeah.
Because you just never know when, your story may impact one person's life and completely change their life. And
Mhm.
that may be the greatest impact that anyone could ever hope to have, because you never know what that person's going to go on to do.
Oh,
You
for
just,
sure.
it's like I feel like it doesn't matter what size your audience is. If there's one person who is transformed by your message, then that
Mhm.
was all worth it. So
Yeah.
how do you help people and support people in sharing vulnerably? Like, I know that that's a really scary thing to start
Yeah.
out doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, number one is I work really hard and try really hard. And with all the experience that I've been able to figure out how to cultivate a sense of psychological safety. When people get around me, I do feel like they feel that I'm going to take good care of them and their story, because, and I will, because I take it very seriously. If anyone does share their story with me, then I feel a sense of honor and respect that they're sharing something so personal with me, and I do want to tend to that story very delicately and with respect. And so creating that sense of safety is so important. But beyond that, it's really just letting them know, again, kind of what the reference you made to the gentleman that works with the nonprofit, like letting them know the outcome, like reminding them why they're doing this, letting them remember what they're going to get out of this experience once they decide to walk it with me, right? Like
Yeah.
you're doing this so that you can reach people, so that you can have an impact, so that more people will want to come along this journey with you and maybe grow your business and other things that are going to be sideline benefits. But you're I say with storytelling, like it's getting people to understand that once you learn how to tell your story, it will stop having power over you. So many people are walking
Mhm.
around right now with their story holding power over them. And once you learn to harness the power of that story, you're going to learn how to take that power and use it for good, do something good with it. And so you will stop letting that story have power over you. So it becomes a very big empowerment piece. And so, yes, other really beautiful things can happen. You can grow your community, you can build amazing connections, you can grow your business, you can make more money, you can get more opportunities, you can go speak on stage, you can go write a book, you can go do a lot of things. But most importantly, you will learn how to harness your own power. And isn't that enough? Like you said, if you can make an impact on one person, yeah, but what if that one person was just you?
Mm,
What if the
yes.
impact you made was on yourself? And you started to hold your shoulders up a little bit more. You walked into the room leading with your shoulders back and your nose forward and your head up and your confidence got boosted and you stopped letting other people boss you around and you started to own, your own power again. Your whole life literally does change when you learn to stop letting stories have power over you.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's so close. Because that was really, no, it's so incredible to hear someone put that so succinctly, and it's really, really true. I think that that is what causes people to kind of feel heavy and feel
Mhm.
powerless, is when they allow the stories, and then they become a story that you tell yourself in your head, and it's not
Yeah,
even true.
they're
It
not even
it
true. That's
happens, and
it.
then it becomes part of the story that's this running dialogue, and wow, yeah.
Yeah,
And I
it gets crazy. It's like this really bad case of telephone. We played the telephone when you were a kid where you'd hold the thing up and you would whisper to the next person, what the story was. And by the time it got around the room, it's a completely different story. And that's what happens in our head. It starts out with some sort of grain of a seed of truth, but not really. But
yeah.
by the time it works itself into our heads and we let that story have power over us, yeah, it takes on a life of its own.
Hmm. Yeah, and I know I was told this a long time ago, so I'm not going to remember the reference, but people will follow confidence over expertise. Like they'll look for
Oh,
the most confident person in the room. You may know nothing about what the subject is, but if you are confident, people are going to gravitate towards that confidence.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I had this mentor early on in my career who, they would send us out to go speak a lot in public. And, I was nervous about it. I wasn't a very good public speaker at the time. And, as a journalist, I just wanted to report the news and sit in front of a camera, but they
Yeah.
wanted us out in public and doing a lot of community service and stuff like that. And I really struggled as a public speaker because I didn't have public speaking background. I didn't have any training. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm doing it wrong and I suck at this and maybe y'all should get somebody else to go do it. I'm not very good at it. And she said some of the best advice that I've been given is that she said, April, she said, this is not about public speaking. She said, as a leader, you are going to need to know how to speak to people. It's not about your performance, it's about your impact, right? And I have taken that with me, and I finally got over myself and went and did the speaking engagements and learned how to get a little bit better at what I did. But it was really like, oh, I got to get out of my own way. And it's really about connecting with people. It's about being willing to look eyeball to eyeball and not blink, not look away.
Yeah.
And that is how you start to build confidence. I mean, when you can look someone else in the eye and you can stand straight in the room, you're already winning because a lot of people cannot do that. And so this is, communication that's even nonverbal at this point, right?
Mhm.
And you're never going to be able to do that until you start putting yourselves in the rooms practicing it.
Yeah.
That's why they kept sending me out as a young journalist and making me go do these speaking engagements. They knew I wasn't any good at it, but they wanted me to get good at it,
Yeah.
and it was such a life skill that I clearly have taken with me, and it served me really, really well because when I get asked to speak, I say, yes, I'll go speak. Absolutely. Or, when I go into networking opportunities, I can go and introduce myself to people and not crumble. I can hold a room now and it that's in my favor.
Yeah.
This is a good skill to be able to have. And so as leaders, as change makers, as people who want to do good work in the world,
Right.
we need to learn how to communicate with people, and we need to be confident in our ability to do that. And you're never going to get confident and you're never going to learn how to communicate properly until you just go do it. And you do it
Mhm.
messy. I was so
Mhm.
messy in the beginning. I was so messy. You know what? And I'm still a little messy and I embrace that now. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay. I'm just April. I just try to be me and I don't try to be anybody else. And the more that I come across as me, then people really feel like they're getting to know the real me. And that too makes people feel really comfortable with me and, can give off a sense of confidence.
Yeah. Something that struck me, you work with a lot of speakers around holding an audience and being
Mhm.
engaging and longer speaking
Mhm.
sessions. But in this age of social media and shorts and reels and
Yep.
10-second clips, how do we capture attention for a long span of time? Because we're all like these micro attention spans at this point.
Yeah. Well, the what we need to be is better consumers. So we need to go and practice our attention span. We need to stop consuming so much short content and start consuming longer content again. We used to do that, and we've gotten away from it. So when we become better consumers, we will naturally become better engagers, right? We will pay a little bit more attention to some people. So that which we desire, we must also, put forth, right? We can't say we want to get attention from people if we're not willing to give people our attention, right? Like it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
So I think we have to stop being so scared of creating long form content. And listen, I am
Mm.
telling myself this right now because, I am a podcaster. You mentioned that I have my own show. And so I'm definitely creating long form content for my podcast every week. But I'm challenging myself right now because I play the social media game. I've got all the shorts, I've got the reels, I've got all that too. But I'm like, yeah, but this isn't, I mean, like, when's that going to go away? Probably in a couple of weeks, right? Like who knows how long that's going to last. And so I'm like, what I really enjoy is writing to people, like writing my emails, writing newsletters, and I am challenging myself to get back to that more. I do send emails, but a lot of times they're just the quick little emails of promotional things that I got to get out to people. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm better than that. And I want to be a good consumer and I want to be able to consume other people's content. And so I also want to create that content that other people can consume and really be served by. Because how much can we serve people in 20 seconds?
I know it
That's
bothers
not
me.
much. That's like really hard. And so I don't know, I'm just kind of like calling forward a revolution here on this long form content. We need to get back to it. We need to, stop paying attention to so many and start streamlining and maybe paying attention to a few and give those people a lot of our attention. And then we in turn will find people that do the same for us. But we got to put good content out there.
Yes, yeah, and that's the key. I'm very much a go deep person.
Me
I want to
too.
get to the heart and the emotions
Yeah.
of the things, and I get frustrated with this short form content because I can't bare my soul to you in 20 seconds. It's just
No,
not it's not
no,
effective.
it's very hard. And, that is why I like speaking so much and why I train other people to speak. It's because go and get in the room with people, get out there in real life, get away from the cameras and the social media and all the stuff, like I had to do again when I was young in my career. I wanted to hide behind those cameras. Trust me, I did. I would have been happy all day long doing that. But that wasn't going to stretch me outside my comfort zone. And it didn't teach me how to interact with people. So it was when I started getting out there in public, interacting with people and having to introduce myself and, get to ask more questions and get to know people. That was really when connections started being formed and that was all the difference maker. And so we need to be out, communicating, connecting in real life with people. And that's why, as business owners and leaders, I think, you need to be a speaker. You need to be in the front of the room leading the charge on that.
Mhm. Can you tell me about like when you were out, when you've made connections? Because I know you go to a lot of events, you speak
Mhm.
at a lot of events, you're really good about putting yourself in the rooms. Can you think of a connection you made that was really meaningful, like a conversation you had or a great connection with someone?
Um, I experience this a lot. I mean, I feel like every time I go out, I actually keep a tracker. So this is something that I teach in a program that I have that I teach them how to like track all the speaking engagements that you're doing. And speaking engagements can be a podcast interview. It could be going and doing a local networking event. It's not, like I said, we're not having to talk about like, oh, you went and spoke as a keynote speaker for
Right.
5,000 people. It can be that, but it doesn't have to be. So anytime you just get a chance to speak and share your story in front of someone else and you had the audience's attention, right?
Mm.
So I track all of the different places that I go and I speak and I keep I have a system where I'll make a note of people that I met, people that might have come up to me afterwards and introduced themselves to me or handed me their card and said, "Hey, I want to have a follow-up conversation with you." And a lot of different things unfold from those speaking opportunities, if you will. Sometimes it's people connect with you on social media. Sometimes they get on your email list. Sometimes they do. They come up to you afterwards, they hand you their card, they book a meeting. Sometimes they give you a referral. Sometimes, they get out on their social media and they're talking about you. So I try to track as much of that as I can because then I want to see what actually happens afterwards, and so much of when I go back and I look at my tracker and I see some of the clients that have walked through my doors or the new friends that I've made, just these connections that I have, not only have they built my business, right, and allowed me to continue to grow, but I've benefited. I
Mm.
mean, I have genuinely benefited from getting to know them. They've shared their story with me, and in a lot of ways, their stories have inspired me. They have no idea. Some days I'm down in the dumps, and some days I'm not having a good day, and some days I'm letting the devil get to me and speaking to me in terrible ways. And so when they share their story with me, I mean, they are feeding my soul and they
Yeah.
don't even know it, but it's like I can look back now and see the chain of events and the people that I have connected with. And, they've told me the same thing. Thank you for sharing your story. That really impacted me today. And by the same token, when given the opportunity and they've shared their story with me, it's done the very same thing. So it'd be very hard for me to pick out just one because I think this is the great blessing of what I get to do for a living is that I'm around this all day long. And it's addicting. Like I want more of it, because it does fill my soul up. My business name is Light Beamers, and my tagline is when you share your story, you shine a light. And that's where the name Light Beamers comes
Oh,
from.
yeah.
And truly, that light is inside those stories, right? It literally will fill me up with light. And I know that when I go and share my story, I get the opportunity to shine light for other people. And
Yeah.
that is just the best. It is the best, and you don't have to have a big business like mine being in the world of storytelling, but you can infuse storytelling into your world and
Mhm.
experience the same benefits that I have from putting storytelling at the forefront of mine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my gosh, I had this thought flit across my mind screen. If we get wrapped up into the stories of Super Bowl commercials, for Pete's sake,
Right,
I
exactly.
mean, like crying. I have
Yeah.
cried at good commercials. If those can grab our souls in a certain way, then how much more can your story of shared humanity really grip someone?
I mean, it can change a lot. It
Yeah.
can change the trajectory in a lot of ways. And like I said, it can just really do a lot for you personally, just helping you understand yourself better,
Mhm.
helping you kind of calm down about some things. It just makes I just say storytelling helps me make sense of the world for sure.
Yeah. So how does someone get started? If they're listening and they're feeling that tug of,
Mhm.
oh gosh, I probably do have a story that would be worth sharing. What do I do? What's my first step?
Yeah. Um, well, in terms of just like honestly, some things that I think would be helpful is just start to immerse yourself in some storytelling spaces. So obviously, I have a few of those spaces that you could
Mhm.
come and hang out in. My podcast, The Inside Story, I think is a great place to just listen to some other people sharing their story. That we're very focused on storytelling there.
Mhm.
And I teach around storytelling on some of the solo episodes as well. And I share a lot of my own personal stories because I am a student of the craft. And I started my podcast because I wanted a space for myself to be able to continue to build and grow as a storyteller.
Mm,
So the podcast is a great place. We have an online community that's free. It's on Facebook called the Light Beamers Community, and we do prompts in there. And so
mm.
it's a great place to start. I always say start small. Don't start with the giant story. Start with the smaller ones. You have to baby step your way there. It's kind of like starting with that first line of questioning of where are you from, right?
Right.
We got
Yeah.
to start there. And then we're going to peel back your storytelling onion and get down to the deeper levels. But you have to start and you have to make an intentional effort. And
Yeah.
so inside our community, we'll do prompts and things like that to get you started. And the goal is to get you in there practicing sharing your story. I want to be the person that's sending you out telling your story, and we
Mhm.
do that in our community on a regular basis. So I would say immerse yourself around some communities that are actively focused on storytelling, and naturally you're going to learn something. You're going to pick up on a thing or two, and hopefully you'll take some action, and you'll start practicing, and you'll start testing your story, seeing
Mm.
it, what do you really believe? What is important to you? Like, what is the journey you've been on? Is it really true that that story holds power over you, or should you question that, And
Yeah.
so I think those are great places. I have some additional free resources. There's a formula that I teach around storytelling. I call it the story arc and story formula, and that's free on my website. So lightbeamers.com, you can go and grab that.
Yeah.
But that's really the process as a journalist. When I would go and interview people, I ask a lot of questions in maybe a 15 or 20-minute interview, but it really boils down to three things that I was really always looking for in trying to get to the answers is really just what's in that story formula. And I'm like, once I knew I had the people answer these questions, that's when I knew I had the story. That's
Mm.
when I knew the interview was over.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I teach that now because not everyone gets me sent to you to go do that for you. So I want to teach you how to ask those questions of yourself so that you can get to the story so much sooner and start sharing that story with more people.
That's beautiful. I'm going to put the link to that right in the show notes so we make it really easy for everyone to get
Yeah.
access to that. And yeah, and my first recommendation for everyone is always just start.
Yeah.
Just
Just
do
start.
something. Just
Yep.
start. And you're going to start, like you said, you're going to start messy and you may do it messy for a while. And really, honestly, that shows your humanity
Mm-hmm.
more than, if I see someone who's struggling, but they're doing the thing, I'm going, wow,
Yeah.
man,
I
like
know.
look
Go,
at them do
girl.
the thing. Yeah.
Yes. Keep
Yep.
going.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Oh,
can assure
thank-
you it's been plenty of times messy over here. And
oh
that
my
was,
gosh.
like even some of the stories that I'm cultivating now, anytime like, oh, like that's a new story. Okay, I should work on that one.
Mm,
It's a little messy,
yep.
and that's okay. Like it's like anybody that writes a great novel or delivers that great keynote speech. I promise you the first draft was pretty messy.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So
There's a
be
reason.
willing to be messy.
Yes, there's a reason I used to teach high school English, and there's a reason why I would always tell my students, this is your final draft.
Draft.
'Cause it's never finished. You're never
Never.
going to be finished,
No.
and your life is a draft. You are
Mhm.
in the process of cultivating a story of yourself. So why not use that experience, that lived experience that not a single other person in this earth has to share and to make
Yeah.
something beautiful from it?
Yeah. I mean, if we die and just take all of this with us and not share it, I mean, what was the point? What
Yep.
was the point of going through it? I
Yeah.
don't even get it. Like, I just feel like this is, God built us for community. I mean, we know this. Like, we were not designed to be alone.
Yeah.
And if we don't share, then that's not participating in the community in which we were designed for. So it just, we got to get out of our own way, though. Like, that's the biggest
Yes.
problem that people have, myself included.
Mhm. Yeah.
Still plenty of times where I get in my own way, but I'm able to recognize it, like, oh, here, I'm doing that thing again. I'm in my own way. So get around a community of people that are in the daily practice of trying to get out of their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of this with
Thank you
me
for
and for
having
sharing with the
me.
listeners.
So fun.
Yes, yes. I really hope that our conversation has encouraged some people to at least start thinking about how they might share their stories,
Mhm.
because everyone has one. It's true. Yeah. And
Yeah.
sharing that does create community, because sharing your
Mhm.
story then allows other people to see commonalities in your humanity and their humanity. And
Yeah.
say, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There's someone else like me. It's
Yes,
a great
exactly.
gift that we
Yeah.
can give to each other. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it so much.